So we are running through this EICR on our new home, and it was first installed in 2020, so it's not an especially old install. And before we carry out any testing, the most important part of any EICR really is the visual inspection. This is quite a large premises, so there's 3 of us in here, so again it's kind of project managing between yourselves as well and breaking this install up into specific parts. But one of the things I would try and do as the person who's fundamentally responsible for this report is to run through the whole building myself at least once, and then also release the dogs of war onto the install to go and do their work, and that is Matty and Nathan. More pairs of eyes who look through things, the better. But we always start with the main intake. So we've got our main intake here. We need to try and identify the earthing system and what kind of supply arrangement we've got. And we can see here we've got a CT metered supply. It is TNCS, 3-phase, as you can see in there. And we do have a single point of isolation for the entire installation, which is this 125 amp isolator here. We then pop up into what is our main distribution board. There are 2 distribution boards in this installation, as I'll show you as we wander around trying to look for snags and faults. And DB2, if I can find where it is, there. So DB2 is up in the server room. And the rest of this is just a mixture of single phase circuits for your basics, sockets, lights, fire alarms, all the usual stuff like that. And then the 3-phase stuff is for the roller doors and some 3-phase isolators that are around the building, labelled up for their original use. Obviously that's not longer the case, so we can reapportion new labels and tags to them through the course of our setup. It's a well labelled main intake, so all our labels are in place that we need, aside from I'm noticing the earth ones are actually missing as I say that. But we've also got our fan switch on here for the downdraft fans, because there is a gas blown heating system. And we've also got an outside lights switch there as well, and they're on dusk till dawn sensors, so you can turn them off and on if you want to. We'll go up this way, and as we go up, we'll have a little look for anything on the electrical accessories that isn't quite looking as it should be, and any of our containment as well that's readily accessible and we can see. We'll make a call on that as well. So our accessories here all look to be in good order. We've got a little socket down there, and the labels are in place as well, which is always handy to help you kind of trace what's what. In this little toilet area here, we've got a little flex cord that's sort of in free air. So that is something that is going to need a bit of attention, really just to give it a bit of security. It's not beyond the realms of possible that somebody could catch that when they're in here. I don't know. Someone might decide to chuck a jacket over it or something. It's amazing what people will do. So you want those cables secured. A little accessory there for the hand dryer, so we can do a bit of checking on that later on. We've also got the fire alarm. We're going to exclude that from our test here. You need to make sure that you detail in your things that are excluded from your EICRs exactly what you're not intending to check. And that's going to be one of those, because we're going to cover that via a separate report. So we'll exclude it from our EICR. We've got a light switch here, plastic, and then the metal clad ones with emergency light test points there for the warehouse lights. They're all switched from there, and there's emergency fittings blended amongst them, which you can see and are tested from there. We've got a little emergency light above that door, and there is one outside of it as well, which is what those cables exit through. And then we've got some containment up here, and one of the things I'm looking for is metallic cable ties. Now we have seen them in various parts of the premises, and there are different rules for the fire alarm ones as well. And from what I can see, there is the odd occasional metal tie in there of the black varieties. I'm not just making that up, they are. It's maybe hard to see, but there's one just on that one there. So that's, we'll double check that and make sure that they are in place. And again, with these, they're not likely to collapse onto anything and entangle anybody, but still, you know, it's good practice, isn't it? So we might as well get some of those on there, as we're going to be occupying the building. Now up the stairs, again, you'll see that, you know, outwardly, everything looks in pretty good order, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And one of the things you do with your EICRs is to check as well as being safe and free from damage, that things actually work. So we will go around and make sure we've got power at all of these points and such like, and have a little look at those. I'm not going to take you in and out of every single room, because that would just kind of become a very boring and long video. But that's basically what you're doing. You're going in and looking for any breakages, any damages, anything obvious that doesn't look quite right. And in here, we've got the dado trunking. So very much we can have a little look in here as well and see what the cabling is like. With your EICR, you need to remember it's not initial verification. So we don't need to do a full test as if it was. You're trying to form a view on the installation's condition for ongoing use and safety. And how you come to that in a percentage of sampling, both of testing and inspection, is up to you as the inspector in combination with the duty holder and person who's contracted you to do the work. I'd say a good base point is at least a full visual inspection of everything that is readily accessible, and then with a sampled inspection to a certain number of accessories. And it's trying to find that balance, because what we don't want to do by opening things up is increase the prospect of you actually, putting a fault onto a system that wasn't there prior to you starting. So we want to deconstruct as little as possible. And my feet are currently sticking to the floor in here because the carpet tiles are up ready for the new floor going down. So yeah, that's one of those. We'll take a few of these sockets off just because it's pretty easy, and they're not going to damage any of the decoration with it being dado trunking, and we can have a look at that. And again, for your exclusions, if you're doing the emergency lights by separate inspection and test as we are, we can exclude that from our EICR and cover it by separate documentation, but we will be checking to the lights themselves. So we're going to include that in the scope of our EICR, aside from the actual duration test. And same for the data cabling as well. If you was wanting to exclude that, you can do. You just need to make sure that you detail it in your report and that the duty holder and person issuing the contract is happy with that. The rest of these offices are all very similar to that. There's a few more down here, and there's a little canteen at the end, and then the rest of the warehouse downstairs. So we'll have a quick zoom around those really quickly, but one area I did want to show you is in here, because this is where our second board is, in the server room. And again, you can see single phase circuits up here. So we've got all of the sockets for the offices up here. We've got the hand dryers. It's really well labelled. We've got type A RCBOs, as I'm seeing on every circuit already. So all really good signs. The only other little gremlin I have spotted is we're missing a screw on there. It's not impacting the overall safety of the board because there's plenty of others in it. However, it should be there. But that's atypical, isn't it? Every DB you go to, especially these Schneider ones, if you don't find one missing, I'd be surprised. Look, there's a little packet of them. No, we've got a spare blank on the top, but not a spare screw. That's a shame. It'll probably be on the floor somewhere. So we'll have a look and see how good the cleaners are in hoovering up. But yeah, that's well labelled. That helps us, because when you're going to do your testing, you know pretty much what each circuit is relating to, when you're trying to identify the number of points on the circuit, where to go and get your test results from. It's really useful. So that's our second board over in there. And again, we're just examining for any basic defects. So as we run through this corridor and in all of these offices, I will go back and look in them, but it's the same stuff we're looking for, so I'm not going to over-egg that at this stage. As we go down the corridor, there was an issue in one of these offices that we've rectified, and that was in here. There was some shonky power that had been taken off these points and data, run across under the floor, and it exited somewhere under this doll's house of my daughter's. She's been in work. You can see where the screw holes were. We've taken all off. That socket box was smashed, so we've at least got rid of that anyway. And we're really just trying to get a feel for the condition of the wiring in here and if it's suitable for ongoing use. Now, one thing you can do is make use of points to inspect some of the higher bay areas without actually using access equipment. So you can see we've got a window here, and we can use that for a distance, a visual inspection of some of these cable routes down in the warehouse. So you can see here, we've got them where they track along and then they run on these steels at a higher level. I can see some over here as well. So while we've got access to this window, we can have a look at that. We can see that it's cable tied. We can see that there's a nice form on the loop at the top there, that it's not abrased on the end of the trunk tray. So just basic little checks like that. And then again for the higher bay lighting, as you can see up here, if I can get the camera to play ball, we can actually get in shot of that. Also the fans, so we can see there is some unistrut running across there, and that the cabling is secured onto it, and that it's not looking to be damaged in any way. We've got jack chain on there as well, which looks to be in good strong order. It's bolted through onto the steel, it's not just using any window brackets, and everything looks externally to have been secured in the right way. Now, you can exclude any high-level work from your EICR again if you do that in agreement with the person who's ordering the work, so the duty holder, the manager of the contract, building owner, operator, whoever that is, as long as you detail that in your report. Now, we've got a scissor lift coming in here. We're going to be going up and doing some inspections on those as well, but we can see from this window. You can at least do that, even if it's excluded in your report and you've got access. You may as well have a little nosy, and we can do the same through this little window in here as well. And there's another one further down. I won't go in the other office because that's the one with the sticky floor. I might not get back out again. But same principle, if you see some of the cabling that's running around some other higher levels where you maybe can't get to off steps, have a little look and see what you can see. Down the rest of the corridor, the canteen, and these are the ones to, I'd say everything is important, but pay attention to these because they're the ones that take the most use. They tend to be around spillages, water, splashes, all the rest of it. You can see here we've got this shonky pipe set up, which was to fill a big T-urn that actually wasn't working, and we're going to do some investigation as to why in the course of this video, see what's actually been going on there. But yeah, nothing's smashed or broken. The T boiler wouldn't work. We're not sure if it's to do with the timer, the supply circuit, the actual T-urn itself. We've not really investigated beyond the fact it doesn't work. So that's where we are in here. And then there's a last little toilet block in there as well. Now up here, we've also got the suspended ceiling, and those of you who are electricians will know that they tend to hide a multitude of sins, both in the way cabling's supported, some of the terminations that are maybe left up there that aren't given due care and attention, with appropriate junction boxes around basic insulation and terminals, and also just chucked unsupported onto the ceiling grid. So we will have a look above there and see what we can see. I'll take you up there with me when I do that, so we can have a little nosy and see what's what. And then down these stairs, again, get a little look at what's going on. We can see here there's been a leak in this corner, which is interesting. It actually damaged this light fitting. This is a new one that we popped up that wasn't working, and moisture was flooding into there and affecting the little sort of ceiling rose clip connector that's in there with moisture. So we've sorted all that out, but still, that's one of those where if you see evidence of stains on the walls and moisture and water, be a bit more invasive in your investigation and see what's been going where. So we've had a look in these as well, make sure that they're all clean and dry and that there's no problem with anything else. Again, in another canteen area, same principle as the one upstairs. You're looking for splashes, damages, stuff gets plugged in and out more often. People might have a pot noodle on there that they spill or splash, and then under your sinks, if you've got water heaters and such, have a look at them. So again, we can see that there's signs of leaks on top of this. There's quite a lot of excess loop on that cable, and while it's tucked out of the way presently, you don't know if that wasn't chucked in the bottom of the cupboard at some stage, and stuff that's stored in there has pulled on that lead, caused an issue with the connectors. So make sure you're investigating that and having a good old look to see what's what. Out in the actual warehouse, the guys are busy doing bits and pieces, because we did have a snag on this light fitting. It was hanging off the ceiling. Matthew's just been in and repaired that, and there's some shonky electrical stuff behind this fridge here. So there's this batten on the wall and a cable hanging off. It's on a plug top behind there, so we're going to pull that out. We'll take all that away and get rid of it. It's not use nor ornament to us now, so that can be sorted. And then again, around the boiler areas, when you're doing your inspections, you're making sure you've got heat resistant cabling on any flex outlets, that the cabling's adequately secured, any bonding to incoming services is taken account of. And you can see this is our gas pipe here, this is our bond. The gas meter actually is at the other side of this building, but it enters into the building here, so they've tried to get it as close as practically possible where it comes into the building and is easily identifiable. There is also a bond on the actual meter as well, so it's in two separate places. Whether that is necessary or not would be up to your interpretation of the regs as they apply at the time, but for me it certainly doesn't hurt as long as they are both exposed or extraneous conductive parts and require bonding or earthing because of that. You know, you can consider that both through the course of design and install and also on your EICR. But the fact we've got it here is good, so we're really just worried about sizing and continuity, that it's actually an effective electrical connection between A and B and isn't just a little fly lead someone's rammed in that box to make it look like it's bonded. So something else to check. Another little rotary isolator over here. There's lots of these dotted around the place for old machinery, so with these we'll be wanting to check that the old exit holes on the isolators are sound and in place, because obviously these have been supplying machinery at some stage, and you know there could be some open grommet and gland holes on those that are no longer in place. And then we've just got all of the accessories around the place now, so we just check these. Obviously that's been tapped off this socket circuit, so we need to have a proper look at that and see what's going on. And again, sampled inspections, you see something like that, you make sure that's the one that's going on your list and identify what's going on. We've got our gas air-blown heater up here. Oops, get the camera to play ball. And you see we've got some flexes running across, and they are sort of in free air in a way, so maybe something to look at in terms of securing those. So we've got our steel wire armour that comes down to this little spur here, and then we've got this little loop on there again. There's no real securing on that. It's just a bit wappy, and whilst the stuffer's going to grab it, it's certainly something that could be improved without too much effort. And again, any kind of cables that you suspect are likely to collapse and entangle people, you definitely want your metallic fixings on. But regardless of that, for the ease of doing it, we'll certainly be popping a few more onto these anyway. And then our cable running across the back of the steels up there, so we've got that to have a little look at. Same principle with the fire alarm cables. Though it's not part of this specific report, if we notice anything we might as well note it and action it. Overhead containment, as you can see here, we've definitely got the metallic fixings on, so someone has gone and put those in roughly every metre. So you know there's potential there that could drop down and entangle someone, and it's the same with the conduit between these light fittings. There is some metal saddles which I'm sure have been put up there for that purpose as well. So someone has thought about that and tried to reduce that risk to the lowest possible level. See the guys are over in this corner here, and they're just doing some work in the bays for the minute, setting out some of these new boards and stuff. So this is kind of work in progress, but we can see the containment again in that back corner, so we can have a look for any metallic fixings and things on all the different cable types, fire alarms, the main ACs and such. Around the loading areas, we have got a little problem here, as you can see. That's for the detector on the door, so we're going to get that repaired so the door sensor will actually function, and obviously that wants to be sorted out. And then we've got some little bits and pieces in these corners here again with the roller door controls. So these cables again, if we're happy with the support on those, or if we think there's some work to be done in the way these have been secured onto the tray, we can form a view on that as well. I mean, for me, whilst it's not fantastic, it's not anything that's massively incorrect or would be worthy of a code. However, you could still note it as something to consider. These edges are all filed, so nothing's sharp, which is something. Again, when you're making these cutbacks, often they are the edges. You see they've pinched them together, they've filed it down, it's nice and smooth. These, again, for the steel wire armours onto these sockets, they look to be under a bit of strain the way the glands are pulled back. I can't really see that with that in the way. But you know, we'll have a look inside some of these and see what it actually looks like. It probably could have just been done with cut back a bit higher up, and when it swings down you've got a bit more of a swoop onto the socket. So if we just come back another bit on this tray and took that down a little bit, you know, you wouldn't have had that problem. But easy in hindsight, isn't it? And we all have our ways with doing things. So then to check up on these again, we're just looking for securing of the cables and those kind of things. So just basic visual inspections, and go around and be nosy basically, have a few sets of eyes on everything, spend some time on it, because it's that what will result in most of the defects being identified, to be fair. Lots of it is all visual inspection, and don't neglect the outside of the building as well. So we've got security lights up here, we've got emergency lights above the doors, we've got cameras and alarms and all sorts going on outside all around the building. So that also needs due consideration as well. So up in the ceiling void, you'll see it's your kind of atypical setup. We see a lot worse. There doesn't appear to be any cables sat on the actual ceiling structure, and you can see they've been cable tied onto these steel studs. So this is, rather than timber frame studding, old metal thin sheet aluminium studs. I think that's what they form it from. So you need to be careful that you've not got any cables abrasions on these. So we'll be doing some checks to make sure that we don't have any of that at random points through this, and we'll also be able to verify that through some testing as well. When we do our IR and continuity testing, we can see if we've kind of got an issue to any of this framework here. I would be surprised if we do, but we can check that and make sure, because it doesn't take the biggest nick in one of these studs to form a sharp edge, and if someone puts cable tie in the wrong place, you know, you might have an issue with that. And again, you can utilize your technology to have a look around these areas. So we've got long pole cameras that we can pop up these access points we can make in the ceiling grid, and just have a good old nosy around without totally dismantling the entire installation. You know, it's kind of finding that balance between doing a decent inspection, but also not pulling the building back to its bare bones, because, you know, that's just introducing the prospect of causing a problem and also damaging the decoration, getting dust and muck everywhere and really annoying everybody. So you've got to strike that fine line in what is effective inspection, but also not destroy the place while you're doing it. Just to give you an idea, that's kind of the dust that's come off this ceiling tile up here that I've just dropped. So, you know, if you're doing a few of them, you want to make sure you get your dust sheets out on customer premises or have the hoover to hand, and that you're not dropping that on people's desks and in their drinks and over their workstations, because you'll soon become pretty unpopular. So once you're happy you've kind of gone through the install, looking at it as an operator would really, been a little bit more nosy above the ceiling tiles and in any voids you can get to, that's the time you need to then start doing some internal inspections, and it's up to you where you see that bin as acceptable. For myself, we would always try and do at least a 25-30% inspection of internal accessories. Now it does vary and depend. If it's an older installation, if you've got doubts, questions, you can increase that. If it's a newer system, you could justify a smaller number. As long as you're happy with it and the duty holder is happy with it and it's going to satisfy the intent of the inspection, then it's a call that you make as the inspector. Now when you're doing those internal inspections, if you're finding issues, so it could be that some of the wires are popping out the back of the socket fronts as you pull them off, or you find a reverse polarity, or you find a bit of insulation that's been nicked under a screw terminal, you know, you might want to increase that inspection then to see if it's a wider problem, or if it's just somebody who's made one mistake out of 1,000 that they've done. You know, where none of us is infallible, and it can just be that you've found it, great, but it doesn't mean they're all going to be like that. So it's where you kind of sit in that realm. But the big part of doing that is you must ensure that the power is off while you're in there doing those inspections. Now, in an occupied building where it's been used, this becomes challenging with EICRs, because you've got adequate lighting you need to leave people to work with, same for power, not just in terms of doing their job, but safe use of the building. So usually with a big inspection process in a place like this, you're kind of looking at evenings and weekends to try and mitigate that for the customer and enable a safe working environment for you to do your job and for other people not to be impacted while they do theirs. We're lucky here because it's our building. We can turn the power off and do what we like when we want, but it is something to bear in mind when you are out there doing your own EICRs. So with this now, we've kind of taken everything off load in the building, aside from the lights in this room that I'm stood within, so you can see me, and we can now pop through this distribution board and take all of these final circuits off load before we work back to the source and form our isolation on the entire building. And there's two reasons for wanting to do that. One is so we can look in all of these boards with the power isolated to know that we are safe, and we can form a visual inspection at least in the distribution boards. You should never be going in those under live conditions unless it is unavoidable and necessary. It is live working, so if you want to have a look in a DB, you need to make sure you've got the power off to be able to go in there and do it. And if you can't, there should be a very good reason for that, and then appropriate management of that work activity comes in as known live working, because it's unavoidable. In this case, it's very much avoidable. We don't care if the power goes off, we can stay off as long as we want. So we're going to turn everything off, and we're going to have a good nosy in these DBs, because they generally tell us a lot of stories about the rest of the install. And while we've got the power off, I can release the dogs of war around this building to go and open up accessories, sockets, light switches. We'll maybe show you inside a couple of them while we're doing it, and you can have a look with us probably going to go into a good 40-50% of these, really because we want to be absolutely sure that this building is in good order without dismantling the entirety of it. If we find a problem within that, we'll ramp that up a little bit higher. But yeah, let's get the power off. That's one down. Let's go do the other one. Now we need to prove the power's off. So we've been through our safe isolation procedure to ensure that this is actually de-energized, and it is. I've got a little lock on here as well, so now that power cannot be restored. We can run through now and do any of the testing that we need to do for our continuity of protective conductors, and also continuity around the line conductors as a result of that. If you wish, you can then start doing your insulation resistance testing, but you do need to remember that you've got lots of connected loads in the end of line on these, and that can cause you a problem both in the results that can be presented and also with the possibility to cause damage. Some of these loads you might not know the full condition of them, so it could be some sort of drivers that maybe are more susceptible to damage that you maybe not taken account for, and I would always advise to be a little bit cautious with that as you start out, because it's easier to increase your test voltage and test measurements as you become a little bit more confident what is in end of line, rather than to do it first and cause some catastrophic damage to something you didn't account for. We'll have a little look inside this board, because one of the things we do need to do is just verify. Perhaps we'll spin you around so I can look at the screen while you do it. Verify the layout in terms of sizing of our cables, and also their identification and polarity looks correct based on what's actually in this board. And you can see it looks pretty neat in here. I mean, there's a bit of what I would call shonkiness from using tape as an idea rather than sleeving, but you know, it's been done. You can see what's what's, just not how I would maybe have approached it. We have got our phase colorings correct on all of these. If you just look down, make sure line, neutral, line, neutral, line, 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 neutral, line, neutral. And then again on the other side, L1, 2, 3, L1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's worth checking and being sure of that yourself a few times, because it's easy to get just wrapped in the sea of colours and miss something. The other thing that you can do is count up your CPCs for the circuits that are in here. Now this is very much heavy on three-phase circuits, so in terms of CPCs, when you look at the earth bar, you can think, well, that's nowhere near enough. But when you actually look at it, you know, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 circuits in total with the three-phase and the single phase. And if we look up here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 CPCs and earths in there. So we're missing a few, and you might start to wonder, well, why would that be the case? First up, we've got a separate earth running off for our DB2 that's up there on the main server area. So that will account for one of those, and subsequently we can also see that some of these steel wire armors are actually not carrying earth as a separate conductor, so they're using the armorings for it, which brings into question some of the design considerations around their sizes and suitability for that. So we need to make sure that that is satisfied as well, because that seems to be one of the ways they've kept the number of CPCs down within this board. And it is one of the Schneider P-type boards, which are really nice because without these toggles pushed forward, there's actually no live energy on the spine board pins. So you can see these ones here that are exposed as much as you won't want to be in here while it's live. If these pins are pushed back, there's no energy pushed through onto those. And that's been discovered by me, the hard way, a few times when I forgot to pull the toggles out, having fitted the boards and ended up with no power on the circuits, wondering why the hell not. So that's something to keep your eye on. But yeah, we can just fish through this board now and try and trace out which circuit's going where. So obviously if we're going to test this circuit, for example, we need to locate its CPC. So if we run up here, we can see that's actually this flex lead here. So the CPC is there. It's into terminal 16, which as we look through that board, doesn't actually make sense to equate to where you would expect it to be. And these haven't been labelled, so it is going to be a case of trying to visually identify which CPC goes with which circuits, because they're not in the kind of opposing terminal. And you can see here the circuits that are missing their CPC. So we've got these ones here. Well, I say missing them, they're just done off the earth and banjos at the top. You can see they're all, I'll get you down, they're all banjoed up through there. And then if we look in the trunking as well, I don't know if you can see from here actually, but they are all linked across on the underside of the trunking as well. So they are all earthed through and linked across on those banjos, and there is a big chunky earth onto the trunking as well as a sort of separate provision. I'll try and get you down at the top there. It's hard to show you. You can see where the nuts are on the banjos, but there is a big earth nut on there as well. And it's actually, I'll take the trunking lid off because it's going to be easy to show you than try and put the camera around, so at least you can have a look at that. We'll get that taken apart a little bit further and I'll jump back in a sec. So there you go, if you see here we've got this big earth that's coming up, and that's actually on a nut and bolt into the trunking. And there is also the banjos that are tied together off that one in the middle of there as well. So these four armors here all sit onto that. These four armors here all sit onto that into the trunking. And these three armors at this side, no, four, sorry, are all sat onto that as well. The other ones that drop through on this side, because I can see, I know that does have a banjo onto it as well over here. So they are all, they're just sharing these nuts. So that's how they chose to tackle that particular issue. As we look at these ones, we've got our lighting ones here that run across to the grid switch, and these do have a CPC in, and then there's this sort of twin and earth here as well, which is taking the feed through to them, and that's got CPC in the back of here as well. So sometimes you can look at that and think, you know, what's going on? We're missing a few bits and pieces, but actually there, we can see here this doesn't have any sleeving on it, so that's going to need a bit of attention. It's not the best, but it's in there and connected at least. Same with these as well, it's actually tapped in with some different size conductors, so that's something that we can note in there. But other than that, there's not a lot of shonkiness going on in here. No one's really fiddled with it from original installation. And we can now take the neutral cover off and probably lose it when I put the front cover back on, find it on the floor and realise we need to open it up again to put it back. And we can just run through these, carry out some tests for our earth continuity. We can then do some insulation resistance testing on some of these circuits, and we'll probably just do them live and neutral combined together to earth and just see if we've got any issues there with anything. The fact that the majority of these are RCD protected for our single phase circuits, and we've not been having any issues with things tripping, they've already passed the trip test. We'll see what other secrets we can unfold through the course of testing. But again, with that, you're not necessarily tied to testing absolutely everything. I would say the most important test, and the one that people often try to avoid, is your ZS tests. The reason for that is if any of these overcurrent protected devices are holding any secrets in terms of a high resistance through them, that is the test that will find it. It's also the one that proves under energized conditions you've got an earth path of adequate value to operate your protective device. It's all well and good doing that through maths with R1, R2 and ZE, but there's a much more reassurance through an actual measured value end of line, and we'll show you how you can do that quite safely, because lots of people will argue it's unnecessary exposure to live working, and the reality is if you've got a process in your RAMs, you can obtain that value with very limited access to live parts, and I've demonstrated that a lot on the channel before. It's basically nonsense trading providers try to push out into industry so they can avoid the risks of teaching this in a classroom environment and save themselves some money on their insurance policies. And it's de-skilling and devaluing what an actual electrician is in terms of safety of the people operating these systems. We're the gatekeepers of that safety. So we need to make sure we're doing everything we can in our initial verification and EICRs to ensure that that's there. And the ZS test to me is the final little bit you can do with that to ensure it. But yeah, we'll run through some of those tests, probably on the board upstairs, because this is a dark little corner and it's hard to work next to this door with a test set. So we'll maybe do that up on the server board, and we'll run through a test process on one of the circuits so you get the gist of what you need to be doing in terms of that. The final point to note is when you come to put this back together is to go over your terminals with the torque drivers appropriate to what's in here. So you need to make sure you get the manufacturer's data sheets, and because we've kind of been in and amongst everything, we would always, as course, go over every single terminal, even if you've not disconnected the cables from them. You know, if you're in there trying to trace stuff about, you might dislodge something. It's always worth going over those to make sure that they're nice and tight, safe and sound. And again, we'll have a look at that on the board upstairs. I'm just going to put you to one side now and go through this one while I concentrate, and we'll jump back upstairs and have a little look at that board as well. Okay, so I'll bring you in. We've got another very tidy looking board. As you can see here, I've got to pop you on the tripod up there and then I can let go, I think. So again, in this board, because these are all generally single phase circuits, our CPC should correlate a bit more closely to the final circuits that are in here. So if we count those up, we've got 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 19, 20 circuits in here. So this is 24 spare ways. Because we've been 3 phase, it's only a 8-way board. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4 each side. Obviously 8 ways multiplied by 3, 24. So we're missing 4, we've got 20. So if we count our CPCs at the top, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we've got precisely 20, which is good news because that's what we were expecting. We can see there is an earth that is coming across down here, and it drops down this little bit of tube out of the board here, and I believe that is what's going off to bond the gas inside the building. So the main bonds to the meters are taken back to the board that's downstairs, but this is kind of an additional bond that's been popped onto the gas as it enters the building. So that's interesting, but technically it's soundly connected to the system. We'll review that one later on. We've then got our main earth that's coming in off the earth lug here, and then we've got this other earth which is popping the main earth feed into this board. So they've linked down to this earth stud just to kind of earth the box. I think technically speaking with the Schneider boards, unless that's an installed earth lug after the fact, it could well be. It might actually be that is the main earthing point actually on these boards. I often get mixed up between the different brands. Some of them have lugs that they want you to take your main earth to and then link out to the earth bar. Others don't, so it's always worth referring to the data sheets, and I'll do that on this particular case as well. There's that many options out there. It does get bloody confusing. So I'm just going to have a little feel around the top of this board, see if I can find that missing screw. See if it's dropped down in the bottom of here. Oh, we found a wood wall plug screw, but not a front cover screw for the DB. Sometimes they're lurking just in the bottom of the board, but no dice. So with this then, we want to check our polarity, make sure everything is in the right order visually, and we can see our colours match through here for what we would expect with our neutral L1, L2, L3. And then obviously down these, we haven't got any 3-phase circuits, but we're just looking that line and neutral are all the right way around. So we can just quickly zip through those, visually inspect, make sure that we've got those the right way around. It can be confusing with these because they rotate over that way, so you can kind of get used to seeing brown, blue on that side, but this side is blue, brown. So you do need to like reset your brain on that, or I certainly do. We're just making sure that they're all in the right order, and they appear to be. So with this now, we can verify our R1, R2 up to this board. So obviously we've got the power isolated off downstairs, so we can measure through these. I'd expect it to be a very low value because we're not that far away from it, truth be told, and they are 16mm conductors, so we've got good size on there as well, so it should be a relatively low value. And if we want, we can do that under live conditions for a ZDB as well. However, because we can test on all three of these final circuit phases for our ZSs, and we don't necessarily need to know what ZDB is in the course of doing our EICR, you could omit that as a risk to your safety whilst carrying out the test here. And personally speaking, it's no more risky than doing it at the board downstairs for our ZE value. However, if you wanted to, you could reasonably argue that that was acceptable, as long as you got values on three of these final circuits on the different phases, to then know you've got your earth path through each one, basically. Even if you're just doing it on one of the phases and you get a value for your ZS, from that you have got an earth path through for all of the protected devices to operate. However, it's worth verifying across all three of the phases, just in case you've got a problem on the line side through any of the switches in here. This is where you can get your high resistance joints. Sometimes you'll have all come to a main switch where it's failed on sort of 1L3, for example. And that is just due to the way these things are loaded over time, and that they don't fail together, they will fail in separate parts. And by taking a ZS measurement that runs through the actual switch itself, you can kind of verify that it's in good working order under live conditions. It'll make sense as we move forward with that. So we'll pick a circuit, and the one that I've been having questions about is this bloody T-urn, because it's not working. So I thought we'd run through the test process on that, because why not? And if we look on the board schedule, we can see the T-boiler is actually right at the bottom on the left-hand side, so it's on L3. So I've traced that one back, and these do seem to correspond to their markings in the board. So because it's right at the bottom, it should be in way 12 up here, and it is. So that's our CPC going off to the T-urn. So we can now remove that to link out with the line, and we can gather our R1, R2. Now there is linking cables that you can use to do that, and with your dead tests, your R1, R2s, you are supposed to do that with all kind of parallel paths for earth removed. So I would always take that out and use a crocodile clip onto the actual earthing conductor, and I can show you a lead we have for just that job once I find my box of leads. So we've got our R1, R2 link wire from Super Rod, and you can see I've popped the CPC out. We've got a crocodile clip on there nice and tight. We've got our magnetic screw head going onto the line cable leaving out of our RCBO. The RCBO is switched off. These are only solid neutrals, so when you come to do your insulation resistance test, you need to be mindful of that as well, because we've also got the your IR link from Super Rod, where you can do your insulation resistance testing without having to disconnect your screws. But when your RCBOs aren't playing ball because they're a solid neutral, you'll get all of the cumulative paths back through those shared neutrals if you've got any issues with your final circuits and you're not doing a global test. So something to keep in mind on that one. With our particular system here, because it's in use and it's in operation, we can do a global test with our live conductors to earth, so the live conductors together to earth as a whole on the board, and we will do that later on. We might just demonstrate the insulation resistance test on this while we've got it. For a final circuit, why not? So you may wonder why I'm bothering to wire this in at this stage. So obviously this is a dead test, we've got access to these terminals, I could just come and probe on there and get that value. However, I'm thinking of coming back to do a ZS test on this under live conditions, and I want to prove that my adapter's actually wired in correctly to these terminals and we don't have any issues with any of that. So if I pop this in now, when I do my dead test, I'll be able to get a value that should correlate precisely with what the live test is. You can see here we've actually got a bit of a problem with this back box because our cabling is not inside it anything like adequately enough for me. There's some basic insulation in the cavity of this wall, and knowing that these are sort of this steel frame stuff, that's not the best to see. So that's certainly going to lead me to open up a few more of these and see if this is a one-off bit of shonkiness or if there's something else afoot with all of that. But for the minute, we'll pop that back to the wall. I've been over these terminals, we know they're all tight, and then we'll get our R1, R2 and have a look at where that leaves us in just a sec. So I've got my TIS MFT Pro set up. We've got the probes in the appropriate terminals on the top, and I'm measuring between the CPC and the line. So we've joined those connectors at the distribution board. I've switched the isolator on because we're actually running the test through to the output side of this isolator, really just to prove that adapter's soundly connected and in circuit before we do our live test. So we can hit test now, and it should gather us a value. You can see we've got 0.69 ohms. I'll stop that because of the beep. If you are struggling with how to do your leads and such, the TIS test set is really good at running you through how to do that, nulling your leads, getting the values you need. So that's roughly 0.6869 on the line. If we swing this over to the neutral now, and I go and move the terminal along at the other end, we'll be able to measure the neutral too. Now you don't have to do this for your EICR, however, I just want to verify that all of these on that adapter there do have a path through and they're adequately connected. So with this now, it's the same test, but we're into the neutral side of the QTech adapter. It'll do it exactly the same way. I've taken the neutral out of the RCBO at the board because of course we've got those parallel paths with the solid neutrals into all of the other CPCs on those circuits and anything else that might be at play with the bonds and stuff. So I've taken it out. It should be a similar value. If we hit test, 0.63, so it's within what I would call tolerance. It's a little bit lower on the neutral, but that could be because there's a slightly different strip length inside the isolator over here, and even in the distribution board. Those subtle differences will allow for some variation in that, but we're there or thereabouts. We're adequately connected with both the line, the neutral and the CPC to this point here. So we've now got everything set for the ZS measurement. We've got our probes into CPC, line and neutral, and into the corresponding ports in the top of the MFT Pro. If we go onto our loop test, we should see voltage, and we are doing, so we've got voltage between line and neutral and line and earth. Now if we're on no trip, 30 milliamp, if we hit test, we should get some values for both our line neutral loop and our line protective earth loop, and we should see if that kind of correlates with what we might expect to find based on those dead tests and what's going on here. Now you can see we've got 0.66 ohms on our LN, but we've got quite a high value here of around 2 ohms on our LPE. Now this is on a B20 breaker, so we need to remember that in terms of the trip-in performance of that and the time curves that would apportion to this value, and we can see we've got a maximum volt current of 83 amps. So that is ringing alarm bells to me. This should be much lower. So I've been and swapped this now into an adjacent RCBO. The reason being, I'm not convinced that that one's behaving correctly. We know through the dead tests that the wiring should be absolutely fine. However, it's producing a spurious result through the course of the ZS test, and I'm interested to see if that's the issue. So if we hit test now, we've just swapped to a different 20 amp RCBO in that board. It should, if there is nothing wrong with that RCBO, produce the same value as the last one. Be interesting to see what this actually comes up with, and we can see it's dropped it right down. So we're a little bit higher on our live protective earth loop than we are our live neutral one. However, we would anticipate that because the conductor sizes are larger on the neutral loop than they are on the line earth one. We're using twin and earth cabling. So that is now what I would consider a more acceptable reading. We know our impedance value at our distribution board is incredibly low, so that is kind of mapping through with what our calculated value, if you like, for using the ZDB and also the R1, R2 measurement would lead us towards. And just to bring you in closer, if I didn't show that enough on camera because it's hard to see this tiny little screen, you can see those values there, what I'm talking about. And to explain again, the prior LPE loop was over 2 ohms, which is just on the high side, and that is what can happen sometimes with your overcurrent protected devices. They're not infallible. It can also be through your main switches or any isolation point in your circuit where any one of the phases or the neutral in that isolator or protected device can become a high resistance point, and that can then stop your overcurrent protected device in some states from operating when a fault exists on the circuit, which can give rise to danger of those people operating that circuit with a view of towards electric shock and fire. So we're now clipped onto the earth bar. Earth's all back in and present. You can see here I've also popped line and neutral together, and we're going to do our insulation resistance test. So with this one, we're measuring line and neutral together to earth. I can do it at 500 volts because we know there's nothing else in circuit. It literally goes down to that isolator. And if we hit test, if I can get my hand in the right position without knocking this off, it'll start to run its little test, and you can see we're measuring off scale as we would hope and expect. Now, because we know those single insulated cables are outside of the back box, there could have been a problem there, but at least we know now there is no path between those live conductors back to earth. And we can repeat that test between line and neutral itself. Again, the same principle. We know there's nothing in circuit. We know that nothing's going to get damaged. However, do be cautious with that. If you are carrying out that measurement and you do have lighting drivers or other bits and pieces, you've got to be really careful, both with your test voltage and also measuring it between line and neutral and even to earth as well. You don't want to be damaging sensitive electronic equipment. So I've swapped that breaker now and it's absolutely fine. So it's definitely something to do with this. It looks okay. Continuity through it measures okay when it's not turned on. So I don't know quite what's going on there. But you can see how these form their connections. So there is an earth here, which is this pin, and then that's your neutral that's formed through these little clasps here, and on the front your terminal in the top is where you get your line connection. All of those are absolutely fine, all are fine in the board. Swapping the devices fixed the problem, so it's clearly something that's going on with this. Like I say, if you actually take a continuity measurement through it, it's absolutely okay. Maybe in a future video we'll open this up and see exactly what's going on inside it, if we get time to do that. But I just found it interesting, and it's one of those where it's a good example of why your end-of-line live testing is so important, both when you're doing initial verification, because stuff can be defective out of the box, and also when you're doing your EICR. So if you've got doubts about any of these circuits, it's well worth checking. Now, I'm not sure if that TN would have resulted in a trip of that breaker, even if it was or wasn't working. I'd think at around 2 ohms on the loop, and the fact it's an RCBO, you would very much hope so. Maybe once we've got it back upstairs, it's currently in bits downstairs because we're trying to fix it. Just kind of jumped the gun on that. I'd have liked to have plugged it in and seen what happened, but there you go, you live and learn. I wasn't expecting to find a problem with fixed wiring. So yeah, that is what it is. With the rest of this on the EICR front, I hope you found it reasonably useful. There's loads of examples on the channel already of how you can carry out ZE and PFC tests without exposing yourself to unnecessary risk and managing that risk appropriately. And the same at end of line when you're doing all of this. I think we need to get away from the industry messaging with that strong association of live testing and live working, and that it's impossible not to do these things without having probes on terminals, when really if you set a process up through your RAMs, you can end up in that state without exposing yourself to any terminals and terminations through the course of live working. All you've got is your probes going in and out of your connectors, and you can put them in and out while the isolators are turned off as well. So it really can be very safe, and it does bring some value, maybe only in 0.05% of a time, and maybe it's higher than that, who really knows. I just pulled that figure out of thin air. But it does have a benefit, and I think for us as electricians, when we are the kind of gatekeepers and safety for people operating these systems, we're the ones who've gone and gathered the skills and experience supposedly to work on these systems in a safe manner and make sure they're fit and suitable for use. We need to stop this de-skilling where we're saying meter cabinets are fine for single insulated cables, where we're saying live testing is a death knell to the operator, where we're saying consumer units can just go outside. There are so many examples of this. You can qualify in what was 5 weeks, then 5 days, and these things are subsequently changing, and my hope is we'll see some better messaging from the industry of things around all of this, because outside of older electricians banging the drum of why this is important and often been shouted down by those with the biggest voices out in industry and some of those with the strongest opinion, they're negligent to what can actually be done. I'm trying to show clear working examples of that on my channel, and I will continue in that aim, because it's my desire that those people coming after me can work safely and can fault find effectively and can deliver safe and compliant installations for their customers, occupiers and users, and that something catastrophic does not happen to either or any of those parties. I hope you've enjoyed watching this channel. If you've got any questions about any of the things I've shown in it, please do drop them in below. If there's other tests and things you'd like to see, let me know again in the comments. But as I say, dig back into the channel. There's countless examples of it where I've tried to show the good and bad working methods that I use in obtaining results on electrical installations up and down the country over the last 25 plus years. I'm not perfect, don't claim to be, but I do sort of know what I'm doing, and I share a little bit of that with you guys along the way. Thank you for watching.